My dear listener, you've been waiting, praying, and working hard, yet the breakthrough seems distant. But I want you to understand something today. When God is about to surprise you, the signs are clear. It's not in the thunderous moments or the sudden loud changes. No, it's in the quiet shifts, the hidden opportunities, and the unexpected obstacles that will soon become stepping stones. When you're about to step into your destiny, God will often disrupt your comfort zone first. He'll allow things to fall apart because He's preparing you for something greater. You see, your discomfort is not a sign of delay. It's the precursor to your elevation. If you're in a season where things seem uncertain, where doors seem to be closing and your plans are crumbling, I want to encourage you. Those are the signs that the hand of God is moving in ways you can't yet comprehend. Sometimes God has to break your own plan so that He can establish His purpose in your life. The question is not if you will experience the surprise, it's when you will recognize it and how prepared you are to receive it when it arrives. God doesn't send surprises to those who are unready. He prepares you, molds you, and positions you. But here's the key. You must learn to recognize the signs, embrace the discomfort, and remain faithful even when you don't see immediate results. Discomfort is not something we naturally desire, yet it is often the place where our greatest growth occurs. We tend to associate discomfort with failure, setbacks, or signs that something has gone wrong, but in the kingdom of God, discomfort is often the beginning of divine elevation. It is when things are most uncomfortable that God is preparing you for something greater than you could have ever imagined. Think about a seed. When a seed is planted in the ground, it is buried in darkness, surrounded by dirt. It cannot see the sun and it cannot understand what is happening. It only feels the pressure of the earth pressing down on it. For a seed, this is the definition of discomfort. But that very discomfort is the catalyst for new life. As the seed struggles to break free from the soil, it begins to grow, stretch, and reach toward the light. What appears to be a painful process is actually the seed's transformation into something greater. This is how God works in our lives. When we are facing challenges, it is often not a sign that God is against us, but rather that He is preparing us for something higher. Just as the seed must go through the struggle to become a plant, we must endure the discomfort of life's trials to become the individuals God created us to be. In the Bible, we see the same principle at work. Take, for example, the story of Joseph. Joseph was favored by his father, but that favor caused discomfort in his family. His brothers were jealous and they sold him into slavery. Joseph's life seemed to go from bad to worse. First, he was a slave in Egypt. Then he was wrongly imprisoned. Yet, through all of this, God was shaping his character, preparing him for the position of leadership He had promised him. What Joseph didn't know in the midst of his discomfort was that God was working behind the scenes, aligning everything so that he would eventually rise to the second highest position in Egypt and save not only his family, but an entire nation from famine. The discomfort Joseph faced was the process that led him to his divine purpose. Think about your own life. Have you ever experienced a season of discomfort, only to look back and realize that it was in that moment that God was preparing you for what was next? Maybe you lost a job, faced a relationship breakdown, or found yourself in a situation where everything you thought you knew was turned upside down. In that season, it may have felt like God was distant, or even that He had forgotten about you. But God was not absent. He was active, working in ways you could not see at the time. Consider the Apostle Paul, who endured countless hardships for the sake of the gospel. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes, But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul understood that his discomfort, his weaknesses and struggles were actually the places where God's power was made manifest. It was through these moments that he was able to experience the fullness of God's strength. We must understand that discomfort does not always mean something is wrong. It can be an indicator that something is right. The question we should ask ourselves when facing difficulty is not, why me, but what is God preparing me for? God does not waste pain. He uses it to shape us into the individuals He destined us to be. And just as the seed must push through the soil to reach its full potential, we too must push through our discomfort, trusting that God is in control and that this temporary struggle is preparing us for an eternal purpose. When we are uncomfortable, we are being positioned for elevation. It's in those moments that God is stretching our faith, increasing our capacity, and aligning us with His plan. Unexpected obstacles often feel like roadblocks, but in the kingdom of God, they are not detours. They are divine appointments. We tend to see obstacles as interruptions to our plans. But what if these very obstacles were God's way of redirecting us towards something greater? Here's the things that seem to stand in our way are actually the things that are going to propel us into our purpose. Consider the story of the Israelites as they journeyed through the wilderness. They encountered obstacle after obstacle. There was the Red Sea that seemed to trap them between Pharaoh's army and the deep waters. And then there were the shortages of food and water that seemed to threaten their survival. From a human perspective, these were obstacles that had no immediate solutions. But in every single one of those situations, God was positioning them for greater things. The Red Sea was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of a miracle. When Moses lifted his staff, the waters parted and the Israelites walked through on dry ground. What seemed like an insurmountable obstacle was actually the very moment God chose to display His power in a way that would mark them as His people forever. In the same way, the obstacles you face in life are not signs that God has abandoned you or that your purpose has been derailed. Rather, they are opportunities for you to witness the power and faithfulness of God in ways that you never imagined. But you must shift your perspective. Instead of seeing them as setbacks, start viewing them as setups. God uses what seems like a setback to position you for a breakthrough that you couldn't have achieved without the challenge. Think about a bow and arrow. The archer pulls the bowstring back and the tension increases. But it is a pulling back that gives the arrow the power to shoot forward. If the bow were not pulled back, the arrow would have no force to reach its target. Similarly, obstacles in life are like that tension in the bow. Uncomfortable, yes, but necessary to propel you forward. God uses these moments to build your strength, to develop your character, and to increase your trust in Him. Now, let's take a look at the story of David and Goliath. David, a young shepherd, was not supposed to be the one to defeat the giant. He had no military experience, no armor, and no position of authority. The obstacle in front of him, the giant, was not just an external challenge, but a seemingly impossible one. But David did not see the obstacle as something to fear. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity for God to demonstrate His power. David's confidence did not come from his own ability, but from his understanding of God's faithfulness. He had seen God deliver him from the paws of the lion and the bear, and he knew that the same God who helped him in those moments would help him defeat Goliath. How often do we approach obstacles in our lives with a mindset that says, this is too big for me? We look at our giants, Whether they are financial struggles, relationship difficulties, or challenges in our careers, and we see them as obstacles that are too great to overcome. But what if these giants were opportunities for God to show himself strong on our behalf? What if the challenge you face right now is God's way of drawing out a level of faith in you that you have never known before? Every obstacle is an opportunity for growth and revelation. It's in the difficult moments that we are forced to confront our limitations and lean fully into God's strength. Just like the Israelites had to face the Red Sea to see God's miraculous power, and like David had to confront Goliath to see God's deliverance, we too must face our own obstacles with the confidence that God is bigger than anything that stands in our way. When obstacles arise, don't ask, why me? Instead, ask, what is God trying to teach me through this? God often uses our difficulties to reveal his greatness and to position us for his best. What may seem like a stumbling block in your path could very well be the stepping stone that leads you to your purpose. We often make the mistake of thinking that our plans are the ultimate blueprint for our lives. But what happens when those plans crumble? What do we do when we encounter the unexpected and the dream we've been building for years suddenly seems to be falling apart? It's at this point, when our plans are disrupted, that we must remember God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. What we perceive as a setback is often God's divine intervention, rearranging the pieces to fit his greater purpose. Consider the story of Abraham, who was promised by God that he would be the father of many nations. But the path to that promise wasn't a straight line. Abraham's journey was full of interruptions, delays, doubts, and detours. He was given a promise of a son, Isaac, but instead of receiving the promise immediately, he and his wife, Sarah, faced years of barrenness. In fact, they waited so long that Sarah eventually decided to take matters into her own hands, and Abraham fathered a child with Hagar. This decision created chaos and strife, but even in the midst of the mess, God never abandoned his plan. Eventually, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and through Isaac, God fulfilled his promise to Abraham. What Abraham didn't understand in the moment was that his own plans, born out of impatience and misunderstanding, were not aligned with God's perfect timing. His decision to take matters into his own hands created tension, but it was all part of God's larger design. Had Abraham's plans unfolded as he had hoped, he might not have experienced the deep faith and trust that came from waiting for God's perfect timing. It's a humbling reality that when our plans fail, it's often because they don't align with God's greater purpose for our lives. The truth is, God is not bound by our timelines or our understanding of how things should unfold. He has a perspective that transcends our limited vision, and he sees the bigger picture. And sometimes, in order to bring us into alignment with his will, God allows our plans to fall apart so that he can establish his own. Think about the Apostle Paul. Before his conversion, Paul had a clear plan. He was a Pharisee, a rising star in the religious community, and he believed he was doing the will of God by persecuting Christians. But God disrupted his plans completely. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a life-changing encounter with Jesus Christ, and everything he thought he knew was turned upside down. His plans for a career in religious leadership were destroyed, but they were destroyed for a reason. God had a far greater calling for him. Paul's new mission was to spread the gospel to the Gentiles, and through this radical shift, God used him to change the world. God's disruption of Paul's plans was not a mistake. It wasn't a failure, it was God's divine intervention. Paul's ministry was far more effective than he could have ever imagined. but it came only after he surrendered his own plans and allowed God to establish his own purpose for Paul's life. When we are faced with the dismantling of our plans, it's easy to feel lost or confused, but in those moments, we must remember that God has a purpose beyond our understanding. He is working in the unseen, orchestrating circumstances and rearranging things to fulfill his perfect will. So often we want things to happen on our timeline, in the way we envision, but God's timing is always perfect. His interruptions are not hindrances. They are invitations to trust him more deeply and to step into a plan that is far greater than anything we could have conceived for ourselves. The question we must ask ourselves when our plans fail is not why did this happen, but what is God trying to teach me through this? God's ways may seem mysterious at times, but when we look back, we will see that his plans were always leading us to greater fulfillment, greater impact, and greater growth than we ever thought possible. When we allow him to interrupt our plans, he often surprises us with something far more extraordinary than we could have imagined. There are moments in life when uncertainty seems to cloud every decision and doubt casts a shadow over our hope. It's in these seasons of uncertainty, when the path ahead is unclear, when resources seem to be running low, or when the future feels unstable, that we often question if God has forgotten about us. Yet, it is precisely in these uncertain times that God is preparing us for the breakthroughs we've been praying for. The question is not whether we will face uncertainty. The real question is how we respond to it and what we learn in the process. In the Bible, one of the most significant examples of this principle is the story of the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness. After their miraculous escape from Egypt, they found themselves in a barren desert with no food, no water, and no clear way forward. They had been freed from slavery, yet they were now faced with a season of uncertainty. But in that uncertainty, God's provision was at work. Every day, God sent them manna from heaven, and he provided water from rocks. Though their journey was not easy, God never left them, and their uncertainty became a space for God's power and provision to be made evident. Imagine the Israelites having walked through the Red Sea, seeing the miraculous deliverance of God firsthand, only to find themselves in a place where the future seemed unclear. Would it have been easy for them to trust God in that moment? No. Would it have been tempting for them to doubt his goodness? Absolutely. But it was precisely in that season of uncertainty that they were being refined, prepared, and tested. God was teaching them to rely not on their own strength or understanding, but on his faithfulness and provision. Similarly, in our lives, uncertainty often becomes the environment in which God works most powerfully. We may not see it in the moment, but it is often in these seasons of ambiguity that we are being prepared for greater things. How often do we find ourselves in a place where we don't know what to do next? How many times have we been faced with a financial challenge, a health crisis, or a relational difficulty that seems insurmountable? It's easy to be overwhelmed by uncertainty, but it is in these moments that God invites us to lean into him, to trust in his timing, and to see his hand at work in ways we would not have experienced if everything were predictable. Think about the life of Abraham again. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland, he didn't give Abraham a full roadmap of what was to come. Instead, God simply said, "Go to the land I will show you." Genesis 12:1. Abraham didn't know the exact destination. He didn't know how long the journey would take or what challenges he would face along the way. But Abraham chose to trust in God's direction. even when he couldn't see the full picture. And through that uncertainty, Abraham's faith was tested and strengthened, and he became the father of many nations, just as God had promised. In the same way, God often leads us step by step rather than providing us with an entire map of the future. We are called to trust not in our ability to predict what's next, but in God's ability to guide us through the unknown. The uncertainty is not a sign that God has abandoned us, but rather an opportunity to rely on him more deeply. But here's the critical point. Uncertainty doesn't mean that God is absent. It means that he is present in ways we may not yet understand. It's in the silence, the waiting, the unanswered questions that God is working behind the scenes, setting things into motion. His provision is not always immediate, but it is always faithful. When you find yourself in a season of uncertainty, ask yourself, what is God teaching me in this moment? Is he teaching you to trust in his timing, to rely on his provision, to grow in patience and perseverance? God's surprises often come wrapped in uncertainty because it's in these moments that our faith can grow the most. It's not always easy, but it is in those moments of waiting and uncertainty that we are being prepared for what is ahead. The breakthrough you've been waiting for may be closer than you think, and it may come at a time you least expect. Readiness is a key component in receiving what God has prepared for us. It is not enough to simply wait for blessings to fall from the sky. We must be prepared to receive them. God does not waste his blessings on those who are unprepared, just as a farmer would not sow seeds in an unprepared field. In the same way, God requires that we prepare ourselves emotionally, spiritually, and mentally to receive the blessings he has for us. Think about the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25, 1 through 13. In the story, 5 virgins were wise and 5 were foolish. The wise virgins brought extra oil for their lamps, while the foolish ones did not. When the bridegroom arrived, the foolish virgins were unprepared and were left behind. The wise virgins, however, were ready and were able to enter the wedding feast. The key difference between the two groups was their readiness. The wise virgins didn't just hope that the bridegroom would come, they took practical steps to ensure they were prepared no matter when he arrived. In the same way, God has promised us blessings and breakthroughs, but our readiness is what determines whether or not we can receive them. Are we spiritually prepared for the next level? Are we emotionally mature enough to handle the responsibility that comes with greater influence or prosperity? Are we mentally equipped to make the right decisions when the opportunity comes? One of the greatest challenges in life is to remain faithful and prepared when the answer from God hasn't yet come. We live in a world that often demands instant gratification, but God doesn't operate on our timetable. He is working on a different level, preparing us for blessings that we may not even fully understand yet. The question is not whether God will surprise us. It's whether we will be ready to handle the surprise when it comes. Consider the story of David. David was anointed to be king of Israel at a young age, but his journey to the throne was far from immediate. He spent years in the wilderness, running from King Saul, facing immense struggles, and enduring seasons of hardship. Yet during this time, God was preparing him. He was learning leadership, developing resilience, and growing in wisdom. When the time came for David to step into his role as king, he was ready. He was not only spiritually prepared, but he had also been refined through his trials. How often do we think that God's promises will come immediately or that they will be delivered in the way we expect? But sometimes God requires us to go through a process of preparation. David could have been frustrated during his years of waiting, wondering why his promise had not yet been fulfilled. Instead, he used that time to grow. He wrote Psalms, he fought battles, and he learned to lead. When the moment of elevation came, David was ready. Readiness also means developing a mindset that is open to God's plan, even when it doesn't look like what we expected. The key to readiness is not merely physical preparation, but spiritual alignment. We must be willing to surrender our own plans and desires to God's will. Are we ready to step into the role God has prepared for us, even if it looks different from what we imagined? Take a moment and think about your own life. Is there something you've been praying for, believing God for, but when the opportunity comes, you hesitate because you feel unprepared? Often, God is waiting for us to take the first step of faith. Just as Joshua and the Israelites had to step into the waters of the Jordan River before the waters parted, Joshua 3:14 and 17, we must step out in faith before we see the results. Readiness requires action. It requires faith to trust that God will provide everything you need when you step into the unknown. When you look at your own life and the promises God has made to you, ask yourself, am I ready for what God has for me? Readiness is not just about waiting, it's about actively preparing, developing and aligning your life with God's purposes. You don't have to have everything figured out, but you do have to trust that God will equip you with everything you need to fulfill your purpose. And when you are ready, you will be able to receive the surprises that God has prepared for you. As we reflect on the signs that God is about to surprise us, remember that every moment of discomfort, every obstacle, every disruption of our plans, every season of uncertainty, and every step of preparation is part of God's divine plan to elevate us to new heights. His ways are higher than ours, His timing perfect, and His purpose for us is greater than we could ever imagine. It's in those moments of challenge that He refines us, strengthens us, and aligns us with His will. And when the time is right, He will surprise us with blessings beyond our comprehension. But we must be ready to embrace His plan, ready to step out in faith, and ready to receive the abundance He has prepared for us. I encourage you today to trust the process, even when it feels like you are in the waiting. God is working. Know that He is preparing you for something extraordinary. Your breakthrough is coming, and when it does, you will be ready. Good luck on your journey, and may you walk in the fullness of God's purpose for your life. Thank you for allowing me to share this message with you today. Keep believing, keep trusting, and keep preparing. For God is about to surprise you in ways you've never imagined.